In the early morning hours of September 1st, 1923, the air was still, thick with humidity, and the citizens of Tokyo and Yokohama went about their routines, unaware that beneath their feet the earth was stirring restlessly. Life in these bustling cities was vibrant, filled with the quiet murmurs of merchants preparing their stalls, the distant chatter of dock workers unloading cargo, and the steady rhythm of footsteps as men and women hurried to begin their daily tasks. Yet within mere moments, this ordinary day would transform into one of unimaginable tragedy and profound historical significance. As clocks approached 2 minutes before noon, the first tremors whispered gently through the ground, faint at first, like the delicate flutter of distant wings. But swiftly, they escalated into an overwhelming force. The great Kanto earthquake had arrived. The ground beneath Tokyo and Yokohama ruptured violently, shaking the foundations of buildings, uprooting trees, and opening chasms in the streets that swallowed homes whole. Within seconds, panic erupted, chaos spreading rapidly through the streets as the quake shattered everything familiar, bringing Japan's largest urban centers to their knees. In Tokyo, buildings that had stood for decades collapsed in mere seconds, their timbers and bricks raining down onto terrified citizens below. The tremors continued, relentless and powerful, registering at a catastrophic magnitude of 7.9 on the Richter scale. It wasn't just the intensity, but also the duration that multiplied the horror. For 4 devastating minutes, the earth shook mercilessly, leaving no corner untouched by destruction. Yokohama, Japan's most significant port city at the time, fared no better. Warehouses filled with valuable silks and precious cargo crumbled instantly, their contents strewn across the streets. The bustling harbor, a place of international trade and commerce, was obliterated as giant waves surged violently inland, smashing boats against the shore. Within minutes, this prosperous city became a landscape of debris, flames, and despair. But the quake itself, terrifying as it was, marked only the beginning of a far greater catastrophe. As the dust settled, thousands of small fires ignited throughout both cities, fueled by overturned stoves, ruptured gas lines, and broken oil lamps. What began as isolated incidents rapidly merged into a fiery tempest, engulfing entire neighborhoods in roaring flames. The conflagration was relentless, devouring wooden homes and crowded marketplaces, leaving survivors trapped in a maze of fire and smoke. One of the most tragic episodes unfolded at Tokyo's Rikugun Honjo clothing depot. Seeking refuge from the chaos, nearly 40,000 civilians had gathered in the open space, believing themselves safe from collapsing buildings. Tragically, a violent whirlwind of fire, known as a fire tornado, ignited the depot. Survivors recounted harrowing scenes as the tornado lifted people into the air, flames spiraling into a horrifying vortex, claiming thousands of lives in an instant. Elsewhere, survivors fought bravely to contain the fires. Firefighters and ordinary citizens formed human chains, passing buckets of water from person to person. Yet their efforts seemed futile against the towering infernos, driven onward by fierce winds sweeping from the ocean. Panic intensified as rumors spread rapidly through the chaos, amplifying the confusion and deepening the despair. In this climate of fear and uncertainty, unfounded rumors began to circulate, alleging that ethnic Koreans living in Japan were responsible for sabotage, poisoning water supplies, and setting fires deliberately. These rumors fueled hysteria, leading to violent attacks against the Korean community. Innocent men, women, and even children were brutally targeted by mobs, their lives lost in acts of senseless violence born from panic and prejudice. As daylight faded, the fires continued burning into the night, turning the skies a sickening crimson hue visible from miles away. Tokyo and Yokohama glowed ominously, visible even to ships far out at sea. The destruction was unprecedented, leaving millions homeless, their lives forever altered. Survivors gathered in open parks, riversides, and temple grounds, their faces covered in ash, their eyes haunted by memories of the horrors they witnessed. Families searched desperately through rubble and ruins, clinging desperately to the slim hope of finding loved ones still alive beneath the devastation. Amidst the tragedy, remarkable stories of courage and humanity emerged. Ordinary citizens risked their own lives to save strangers trapped under debris, or to pull injured survivors from burning buildings. Many opened their homes or offered their remaining food and water to strangers, sharing their meager resources without hesitation. International communities rallied as news of the earthquake spread worldwide, prompting relief efforts from countries as distant as the United States, Britain, and Australia. The Japanese government struggled initially to respond, overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the disaster. Communication lines had been severed, roads blocked by debris, and transportation halted. Yet slowly, the nation began to rally. Emperor Taisho himself made a rare public appearance, expressing his sorrow and solidarity with the victims, pledging his commitment to recovery. His words provided solace, inspiring a renewed sense of resilience among the Japanese people, who began immediately to rebuild their shattered communities. The task, however, was daunting. Over 100,000 people had perished in the earthquake and subsequent fires, making the Great Kanto earthquake one of the deadliest natural disasters in modern history. The cities of Tokyo and Yokohama lay in ruins, their streets littered with debris, their skies blackened by smoke. The economic toll was staggering, with billions of yen in damage, crippling Japan's economy in the short term and reshaping the nation's future. Yet, in the face of such overwhelming loss, the citizens demonstrated a profound determination to rebuild. Even amidst grief and devastation, the collective spirit of Japan shone through, inspiring recovery and reconstruction efforts. Communities organized themselves swiftly, working tirelessly day and night to clear the rubble and rebuild their cities from the ashes. Tokyo and Yokohama gradually rose again, reborn with renewed vigor. Urban planning changed significantly, embracing new building regulations designed to withstand future quakes. Roads were widened, wooden structures replaced by concrete and steel, and evacuation routes carefully planned. This catastrophe had indelibly reshaped Japanese society, altering the very fabric of these cities, ensuring they would rise safer and stronger than ever before. Yet, as Tokyo and Yokohama rebuilt, the haunting memory of the Great Kanto earthquake lingered in the minds of all who had survived it, a solemn reminder of nature's terrifying power and humanity's enduring resilience. And yet, this immense tragedy was not merely a historical footnote. It reshaped Japan's culture, politics, and national consciousness profoundly, leaving scars that remain even now, over a century later. As these cities rebuilt and Japan stepped forward into the future, the Great Kanto earthquake became not just a memory, but a catalyst, influencing decisions and preparations for future generations, a lesson engraved in history, both bitter and vital. In the days following the disaster, Japan confronted not just the immediate challenge of recovery, but also a deep reflection upon society, tolerance, and community. This earthquake laid bare the fragility of human civilization and the urgent necessity for compassion, preparedness, and unity in the face of nature's unyielding power. As the smoke finally cleared and the dust settled, Japan emerged forever changed, resolved to remember the lessons learned through suffering, loss, and ultimately, resilience. With the echoes of the tremors fading slowly into memory, the world watched as a nation mourned deeply, gathered strength, and took its first courageous steps toward a new beginning. In the weeks following the Great Kanto earthquake, as the fires finally died and the smoke lifted from the ravaged cities, the full scale of the devastation became clearer. What had once been thriving urban centers now resembled desolate war zones. Yet amidst the wreckage, stories began to emerge, not of destruction alone, but of endurance, of survival, and of the human spirit pushing forward against overwhelming odds. One such account came from a young woman named Fumiko, who had been working in a textile shop in Nihonbashi when the earthquake struck. The building had collapsed within seconds, trapping her beneath a pile of broken wood and plaster. For hours, she lay in the darkness, unable to move, breathing dust and smoke. Yet she survived, not by chance alone, but because an elderly neighbor who knew she worked in the shop refused to give up searching. He dug with his bare hands, calling her name again and again until her faint voice answered from below. Days later, when she finally emerged from the hospital, covered in bruises but alive, she stood before the ruins of her workplace and wept not only for what was lost, but for what had been saved. Stories like Fumiko's were not uncommon. All across Tokyo and Yokohama, thousands of similar moments unfolded. Some people ran into burning buildings to rescue strangers. Others turned their homes into makeshift clinics or shelters. One railway worker, whose name history has mostly forgotten, reportedly spent 30 straight hours helping to evacuate passengers from a derailed train near Ueno, carrying the injured on his back through streets choked with fire and ash. He refused to rest until every soul was accounted for. Beyond the major cities, the countryside had also suffered. In Chiba Prefecture, entire villages were flattened, rice fields swallowed by fissures in the earth. Trains had derailed, cutting off food and medicine to isolated communities. Many people died not from the earthquake itself, but from the weeks that followed, as dysentery and infections took hold. Relief teams struggled to reach these remote areas, but many villagers banded together, forming small networks of support. Shared meals and communal rebuilding efforts became common as the instinct to help one another took precedence over everything else. The international response to the disaster was swift and significant. In an unprecedented show of global solidarity, aid flowed into Japan from across the world. The United States dispatched the USS Huron and other vessels loaded with supplies. President Calvin Coolidge sent a message of sympathy and promised continued support. Britain and France sent financial aid, medical personnel, and engineers. China, despite strained diplomatic relations with Japan, offered condolences and assistance. This global outreach brought a rare moment of international unity, where nations often divided by politics or history found common ground in their shared humanity. American ships arrived in Tokyo Bay bearing crates filled with blankets, canned food, medical instruments, and tents. Volunteers from the American Red Cross treated the wounded in makeshift hospitals set up in parks and temple courtyards. Newspapers around the world printed dramatic images of the ruined cities, spurring donations from ordinary citizens. In Europe, children gave their allowances, churches held special collections, and Japanese expatriates in Brazil and Hawaii organized fundraisers to help their suffering homeland. Yet not all of the aftermath was marked by kindness. As the cities struggled to feed millions of displaced people, tensions flared. Political unrest, already simmering before the disaster, erupted into open conflict. Radical groups blamed the government for inadequate preparation and slow response. The military, alarmed by rumors of rebellion, cracked down on suspected agitators. This unrest coincided with a wave of xenophobia and vigilantism, particularly against Koreans and Chinese residents. Martial law was declared in Tokyo, and thousands were arrested without trial. In this climate, fear often overwhelmed reason, and the line between protection and persecution blurred dangerously. The political consequences of the earthquake extended far beyond immediate emergency powers. In the months that followed, Prime Minister Kato Tomosaburo died suddenly, and his successor, Yamamoto Ganohyo, faced increasing pressure to restore order and confidence. The disaster exposed weaknesses in governance and infrastructure, leading to demands for reform. Discussions began about decentralizing the capital's administration and preparing more rigorously for future disasters. Even as the physical ruins were cleared, the government grappled with how to restore public trust and rebuild not just cities, but the very structure of society. Meanwhile, the reconstruction process began in earnest. Tokyo's city planners saw a rare opportunity to redesign the metropolis. Visions of modern boulevards, green spaces, and wider roads took shape. A new emphasis was placed on earthquake-resistant buildings, and the city's water and sewer systems were overhauled. Brick and wood structures gave way to reinforced concrete. Architects and engineers studied the disaster closely, drawing lessons that would influence construction throughout the 20th century. Yokohama's port was rebuilt to better withstand seismic activity, and new zoning laws limited the kinds of structures that could be built in dense areas. Schools and hospitals were prioritized in rebuilding efforts, many designed with wide courtyards that could double as evacuation spaces. Parks were designated as emergency gathering zones, each equipped with water storage and emergency supplies. The memory of the destruction remained vivid in the minds of planners and citizens alike, shaping the future of urban design in Japan. Cultural reflections on the earthquake emerged as well. Writers, painters, and poets grappled with the enormity of the event. Junichiro Tanizaki, already a prominent novelist, wrote stories capturing logical trauma of the survivors. Artists painted haunting scenes of charred neighborhoods and wandering refugees. In kabuki and no theater, the earthquake became a backdrop for moral tales and reflections on impermanence. The Buddhist concept of mujo, or the transience of all things, resonated deeply with a population that had seen so much vanish in moments. Children who lived through the quake would carry its memories into adulthood, shaping their worldview and values. Many grew up to become the architects, engineers, and civil servants who ensured Japan was better prepared for future disasters. By the time of the 1964 Tokyo Olympics, the city had transformed, not only in appearance, but in spirit, embodying resilience born from its darkest day. The Great Kanto earthquake also left its mark on science. Seismologists and engineers studied the quake's patterns extensively, leading to significant advancements in earthquake science. Japan began investing heavily in early warning systems and public education about disaster preparedness. Earthquake drills became routine in schools and offices. The phrase, "disaster strikes when one forgets," became a popular reminder, etched on monuments and taught to children. Even today, more than a century later, the Great Kanto earthquake is remembered solemnly each September 1st. Sirens sound across the country, and moments of silence are observed. In Tokyo's Yokohamicho Park, a quiet memorial stands where thousands perished in the firestorm. Incense burns continuously, and names of the victims are etched in stone. It is a place of mourning, but also of reflection, a reminder of the fragile line between normalcy and chaos, and the strength that lies in collective compassion. In the end, the Great Kanto earthquake was not just a story of destruction. It was a story of transformation. It reshaped the physical landscape of Japan, redefined its politics and governance, and awakened a national consciousness about disaster preparedness. It exposed the darkest fears of society, but also its brightest virtues. Amid rubble and ruin, amid sorrow and loss, emerged a vision for a stronger, more unified future. Thank you for joining us in the Great Kanto earthquake of 1923. Hope you enjoyed. Sleep well.